So today I'm going to show you three things. I'm going to show you why you miss huge changes in plain sight, why your brain does it on purpose, and also why your favorite study method is probably wasting your time. So those are the things we're going to tackle today, all in service of cognitive psychology and our goal to understand the human mind in all its mysterious and wondrous and enigmatic intricacies. And today we're going to focus on a very seemingly basic ability of the human mind, and that is the ability to pay attention. So we are going to continue with our look at attention. And today we're specifically going to focus in on what grabs your attention. What is it out there that can just take hold of your attention, even if you're trying not to pay attention to something, but just grabs your attention in a way that your focus cannot be helped but move over to either that stimulus or that location. So on the schedule today, we are going to have our change detection wrap up, where we take a look at the implications of the moonwalking bear and also the test your awareness whodunit video. And then we're going to turn to where does your attention actually come from, and we'll talk about the two major divisions for your attention, the stimulus-driven attention and then the goal-driven attention. We're going to take a look at what happened in COGLAB number 1, which was the change detection COGLAB. And we're also going to talk about long-term memory encoding, retrieval, and consolidation. So this is in chapter 7 of your textbook. And I like to cover this up front because I always found it weird in the design of a cognitive psychology textbook that 7 chapters into this textbook, you finally get to a section about how to study. It might be better to front load that so that you can benefit from that for the first 6 chapters. So we're going to do it today and just go through some of the highlights of how to most effectively study. So you're going to have to spend time studying. That's a universal truth. However, what you want to do is you want to maximize your return on investment when you do study so that that time is used to maximize the benefit that you get out of it. All right, but first, let's wrap up change detection. So just to remind you, last time we took a look at 2 examples of change detection. And this, again, demonstrates the need that we have for attention to detect changes in our environment. So the first one was the moonwalking bear. And if you recall, you were asked to pay attention to 2 teams practicing basketball drills. And you were asked to count the number of passes that the white team made. And then during that very chaotic video, a person dressed in a bear costume walked right through the middle of the field of view, as large as the other players, not tucked away somewhere in behind, not hidden behind a post and just kind of peeking out, but came straight through, did a weird little dance, did what I guess could pass as a moonwalk. Basically, if somebody said, I saw a bear, but that wasn't a moonwalk, I would have given you credit for that, for noticing it. But basically, something in plain view, something weird that was occurring, and most of us didn't even see it. In fact, I think on that one, all of us missed it. And then we had another example where it was the test of awareness whodunit example. And in this one, we watched a video of a kind of classic detective story wrap-up scene. And I asked you to pay attention to whether or not the detective's coat actually changes. And all of us were able to detect that the coat did change. However, when I asked you if there was anything else weird that occurred, we were able, as a group, to notice 2 more changes. So 3 changes total out of 21. And when we took a look at the behind the scenes footage, we saw that just about everything changed, from the identity of the murder victim to the decor, to the paintings, to the tablecloths. The carpet was swapped out. The night was swapped out for, the bear was swapped out for a night, I believe. So that's where we kind of ended. And I gave you the challenge of kind of checking in and challenging the assumption that we usually are aware of most of the things that are going on around us. I don't know if that's the way that you feel when you're in an environment, But usually I kind of feel like I have a handle on most of the things that are going on in my environment. And yet a demonstration like this shows you just how little we are aware of things that are occurring all around us. So the real question that I left you with is whether that is a failure of your mind or whether it's a design feature. And if it's a design feature, what is it being designed for? So any speculations? Mm-hmm.
It's in order to take our resources and save them for the most important things. When something's happening that isn't too big of a deal, we don't solidify that in our memory. We don't use the resources to encode that, and we preserve that for something perhaps more important that we think we're going to need. Obviously, our brain doesn't always know what we're going to need.
Mm-hmm.
It thinks it does.
Okay, so the idea there, the first kind of hypothesis was that our minds are encoding what we have previously identified as the most important information, the most crucial information or things to notice, and everything else is not being processed or not being encoded, I guess, in enough detail that you would have noticed the change. Is that a fair summary? Okay. Any other ideas? So we're not encoding certain things to preserve resources. Any other speculations about what might have?
To not like overload the mind and the brain, because I feel like if you pay attention to every little thing, your brain can't handle it.
Okay, so we don't want to overload the mind. We don't want to overload the brain. So processing processing enough information where we would have noticed all 21 changes probably just would have overloaded our mental capacities. We probably just physically would have required way more neurons in our brain to do that kind of processing. And that would have required way more energy in our bodies in order to do that processing. We tend to, as humans, think that because we are proportionally our brain size to our body size, one of the biggest brains in the animal kingdom, we tend to think that bigger is better. But a lot of times it's not. And the amount of resources that you would need to do that processing there would probably just lead to a non-viable organism. We probably just wouldn't be able to survive. So we have your brain maintaining the resources that it has. Sorry, your mind maintaining the resources that you have. We have your mind not getting overloaded by the amount of attention that's coming in. Any other speculations about what might have been going on or what this actually reveals is good about your mind? Okay, so let's sit with those two for just a moment here because I think those are very, very interesting. Let's say, for example, that we lost that ability to not guard our resources, and we actually there was a switch in our brain and it just went on and it said pay attention to everything. What do you think might happen to you in that regard? Mm-hmm. So your mind would be all overwhelmed at the time. And what does it feel like when your mind is overwhelmed? It feels confusing. Anything else when you feel overwhelmed? Think of it this way. In your lives, when there's too many things going on and you're getting pulled in too many directions, how do you feel? So it's harder to focus because you got too much stuff going on. Yep. You feel stressed and you feel anxious. Yep. You feel overworked and exhausted. So if we were able to pay attention to everything, you would feel stressed, you would feel anxious, you would feel overwhelmed, you would feel exhausted. You would basically be in that state where people are when they're hypervigilant and you just can't relax and you just can't focus because every little sound pulls your attention. And you're almost like, I don't want to name a particular mental illness because I'm not an expert on what that would do. But I mean, it's not a good thing to notice every little thing that occurs or not be able to ignore the tag on the back of your shirt. And you just got to keep fiddling with it because you just can't not pay attention to that tag. So this inability to notice these changes actually reveals a very important design feature of our attention, and that is the ability to select, number one, what we're paying attention to. And that's another thing that we're going to see real soon when we talk about the sources of attention, because it's one thing to be able to focus on a task. That's a really good skill. But it's another thing to focus too much on a task. So just to give you a ludicrous example, if you were studying and somebody started playing, the TV in the background, it would be a great ability to focus in on what you're studying and ignore the TV in the background. If, on the other hand, your building was on fire and people were screaming and the fire alarm was going off and people were saying, get out, it's a fire, it would be horrible if you were so focused on your studying that you didn't notice what was going on. So we want some amount of focus. We don't want another amount of focus. And then the last thing that I'll point out about this, because it will come up again later when we're talking about visual perception, is that oftentimes we have this feeling that we do notice everything in our environment, or most things in our environment. So usually when I show this video, students are surprised, right? When I say, oh, there's 21 changes, students are never like, oh, I thought there was more. I really didn't, they're always like, oh my gosh, what? I didn't notice 21 changes. So in our world that we normally live in, we have this feeling that we're sort of in the know in terms of everything that is going on in our world. And I'm just going to leave this with you. People used to think that we did that because we represented the world in our mind. So we had some sort of representation of what was going on outside in the world, and we had it in our mind. And if the world changed and the representation in our mind did not match up with that, we would notice the change. So we would have the bear represented in our mind. And if it changed to a knight of shining armor, we would be like, oh, hey, wait a second, representations don't match. Work like this and work in ecological perception, which we're going to get to when we get to perception, has showed that for many, many things, we use the external environment as its own representation. So kind of in contradiction to the modeling and representation that we were talking about early in the course, where we said that you want a simpler model and you can have different sorts of representations. Sometimes the best representation is actually what is out there in the real world. So if I'm looking out here at this class and I want to know what color shirt somebody is wearing, I can just look at that person and say, oh, it's a brown shirt. Oh, it's a green shirt. And if I want to know what color that shirt is later on in the class, I can just look again. I don't need to represent that in my mind. I can use the world as its own representation. So hang on to that idea, because we're going to get to that when we hit up ecological psychology. And it is something that not only was very important in understanding how our vision works and our mind works, but also very important in machine vision, because much like we mentioned in the discussion here, when machines and computers tried to represent everything in the world, they just couldn't. It was way too much computation. But as soon as they learned you can use the outside world as its own representation, then all of a sudden we made leaps and bounds in terms of self-driving cars and self-cleaning vacuums. So keep that in your mind. We'll return to that. But for right now, I do want to shift gears a little bit and take a look at our first topic of the day. And that is the best ways to study. So we all know that we need to study. The question, though, that we're going to try to address right here is whether or not the hours that you study actually get you anything. What is that return on investment? So what I want to know before we begin this kind of look is, when you study, what feels like you're actually learning? So just kind of a quick show of hands. There's no incorrect answers here, but because it's what feels like studying, not necessarily what you do, but what feels like studying. So when you're studying, when you're reading through your textbook or going over your notes, which of the following actually makes you feel like you're learning the material? So we'll start with number one, highlighting. How many people feel like highlighting, or how many people would say that highlighting feels like learning? Okay, rereading the information. All right, we got about half the class. Doing practice questions. All right, we got more. Explaining it to someone else. Okay, we have even more. So this is one of those times where the important distinction here is not necessarily what's best, because we're going to get to what's best in a while, but it's also very important in cognitive psychology to also address your subjective experiences, and in this case, what feels the best. Because one of the things that we're going to learn in cognitive psychology over and over and over again is what we feel like we're doing and what we think we're doing is not actually what we're doing. So sometimes you might do something and it feels like learning, but cognitive psychology actually finds out it's not actually learning. And that difference between what we think is happening and what it feels like is oftentimes extremely instructive in terms of how our minds, especially metacognition, actually operates. So let's get on to effective studying. So these are just some highlights from the text. We're not going to spend too much time on it. A lot of it is pretty self-explanatory, but research on how students actually study actually found that the most popular methods are highlighting the material in your text or notes. So you go back to the text, you go back to your notes, and you actually just highlight the things that you consider to be important, and also rereading your text and your notes. Those were, on different surveys and different research polls, the most popular techniques that students used in order to study. But unfortunately, research has generally found that those techniques are just not effective. Research has found that it feels like studying, but that hour that you spent highlighting and rereading could have actually been more effective if you used other strategies. So what are those other strategies? The first one here is elaboration. So elaboration basically helps transfer the material that you're reading into long-term memory, right? It takes it out of this temporary, I'm thinking about it store, and it puts your information into your long-term memory, which is where we want to get it. And what that means is thinking about what you're reading and giving it meaning by relating it to other things that you know. So we are going to see a prime example of this when we take up the COGLAB today. And one of the things that I always like to do whenever I read psychology experiments, whenever I find a new psychology theory, a new psychology phenomenon, I always like to think, where have I seen this in the real world? Where would this actually impact me in the real world? How can I apply this to the real world? And that kind of exercise is elaboration, and that helps you to solidify your knowledge, transfer it into long-term working memory, which is where we want to get this information. All right, so related to elaboration is generating and testing. So the research on retrieval practice and testing effect indicate that repeatedly testing yourself on material you're studying pays dividends in improved memory. And this is one of the reasons why we have the pre-tests and the post-tests in our design of the course. I would also highly recommend using ChatGPT. Again, you have an IU account that you can use to access the latest version of ChatGPT for free. I highly recommend asking ChatGPT to test you on things as well. That's also another way to kind of generate and test. And what they found with this, it was a very interesting study where they looked at the effect of pre-tests. And basically, pre-testing was found to be better than not pre-testing alone. But the effect was greatest for the questions you got wrong during the pretest. So when you take a pretest, the effect that it has on the material that you get wrong is the biggest change. So the performance on the pretest, the questions that you get wrong, actually you have the greatest amount of learning because you did the pretest when you follow up and test those on the exam. So that's one of the reasons why I give students multiple opportunities, multiple attempts at the pretest, because struggling through it, getting those questions wrong is actually one of the places where that study time makes the biggest difference. So the next time you're reading through one of the pretests and you get yourself a question wrong, don't judge yourself, don't be angry, but just kind of sit back and go, maximal learning. Awesome. All right, organization. Organizing material to create a framework that helps relate some of the information to other information to make the material more meaningful and then therefore strengthen encoding. So we can see here it's a lot like elaboration, where you relate certain material to other material. So the way that we related attention today to ecological psychology, it doesn't work until you learn the second thing, but let me say that once we get to ecological psychology, it would strengthen your encoding if you thought about it and say, oh, hey, wait a second, this is a lot like the attention thing that we did with the change blindness, because that again strengthens those connections and will allow you to remember more about ecological psychology because you already have that change blindness encoded into your long-term memory. All right, this next one I'm a big fan of, and that is taking breaks. So research has shown that memory is better when studying is broken into a number of short sessions with breaks in between than when it's concentrated in one long session, even if the total study time is the same. So I will admit I was very bad at this when I was an undergrad. I understand that spacing out studying is a very challenging thing to do, but the 8 hours that you'll spend studying a subject will be way more effective if it's 8 1-hour sessions rather than 1 8-hour marathon session. And that's just the way that our mind works. It's called distributed practice, and it's just a feature that we have. So you're gonna put in the 8 hours anyway, might as well maximize that return on your time investment. So another angle on taking breaks provided by the research shows that memory performance is enhanced if sleep follows learning. So this is also something that you can take advantage of. It might be best if you know you need to study and you typically go to bed at 10 p.m., set up a study session for 9. That could be the time when you decide, all right, this is the hour that I'm going to spend. And then if you go to sleep right after you study, that is the maximum way to get that information consolidated, transfer it to your long-term memory. All right, 2 more. Avoid illusions of learning. So a lot of times we get illusions of learning, and that is because certain things make us more fluent with the material rather than actually learning the material. So reading and rereading material increases fluency. So if I was to read, let's say, for example, that first sentence in this paragraph, one of the conclusions of both basic memory research and research on specific study techniques is that some study techniques favored by students may appear to be more effective than they actually are. If I read that over and over and over again, I might not understand what that sentence means, but eventually I would become very fluent with it. And I would read it something like, one of the conditions of both basic memory research and research on specific study techniques is that some study techniques favored by students may appear to be more effective than they actually are. It became more fluent. It feels like I've learned something. Even if I don't know what any of those words mean, it still kind of tricks your mind into thinking, oh, I must be progressing, I must be getting better. And you have fallen for illusions of learning if you have ever in your life walked into an exam confident, sat down, opened up that first question and thought, I don't remember anything. It's all gone. The truth is it was never there. It was just that you thought it was there because of these illusions of learning. Another mechanism that creates the illusion of learning is the familiarity effect. So the more familiar you are with something, the easier it is to process whether or not you understand it. And that again gives you that feeling of learning, that illusion of learning without actual any learning whatsoever. And then finally, it goes beware of highlighting. And again, sometimes I just realize as I highlight this information here to beware of highlighting. But I'll just leave you with this. When Peterson compared comprehension for a group of students who highlighted and a group who didn't, she found no difference between the performance of the two groups when they were tested on the material. So if you spend time highlighting your material, it is no better then just reading the material. Highlighting doesn't actually add anything. So what can we do? What are some of the things, what are some of the things we can do? And the last trap I don't want you to fall into, being an active note taker is one of the best ways to also consolidate your information into long-term memory. And one of the things to be aware of, not to avoid, but to be aware of, is that computer note-taking can actually result in shallower processing of the material and then poorer performance on exams. So I'm not calling out anybody with a laptop in today's class. It's not what I'm saying here. But it is something that is a trap that you can fall into if you are using your computers to take notes. So let's make sure that we are doing this as best as we can. So why is it that computer note-taking seems to be less effective than actual manual note-taking? Well, the reason is because with computer note-taking, you can actually take notes quicker. And what that leads to, it leads to more word-for-word transcription of the lecture rather than paraphrasing of what the professor is saying. So when you paraphrase, you are forced to synthesize the material, summarize the material, extract the meaning, and then write it out in a way that you have already elaborated and processed that information. If you are typing on a computer and you can do it fast enough, you can actually transcribe what I'm saying word for word, and that bypasses any of that encoding that your mind would have done. So rather than transcribing word for word, if you are using a laptop, just be very, very aware that that is shallow processing when you're just transcribing what a professor says, whereas creating handwritten notes takes longer, so you have to summarize and synthesize in order to keep up with the notes. So basically what you want to do if you're using a laptop is just be very mindful that you write your own notes. Well, not write your own notes instead of typing them, but be very mindful that you write your notes in your computer as if you would be taking notes manually. So summarize things. Don't do things word for word. And if you find that you can't get out of that trap, if you're just like, well, I just can't, I hear it, it goes down on the computer, that's completely fine. But then what you want to do is just later return to your notes and summarize that instead of just thinking that you took effective notes and encoded that information. All right, so any questions about that before we kind of move on to the next not studying phase? All right. Okay, so next up, we are going to take a look at where does our attention come from. So we noticed a lot of how our attention works, but now we're going to see exactly where this attention is produced in our mind. How do we select information to process? What is the process that allows us to do that? And we've already seen examples of these two forms of attention, the two sources that they come from. But one of my favorite examples comes from one of my favorite movies of all time. And before I show you the movie, I was just reminded of this tweet that I saw. I was reminded of this X post, I guess, that I saw, because this movie is from 1999. And every time I enjoy this movie, I just keep thinking to myself, this is from the 1900s. It just sounds so weird to call a movie being from the 1900s, but it just reminded me of this post. So the professor says, I will never recover from this student email. Good afternoon, Professor Penniman. Hope you had a great break. I was wondering if it would be acceptable to use sources from the late 1900s for our final paper. I found an interesting paper from 1994. Is there a cutoff date of publication? See you tomorrow. So this is I will never recover from this email. But the movie is The Matrix. And this is a scene in The Matrix that is going to illustrate both forms of where your attention comes from. So without further ado, here we go.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was.
Look again. Read it.
All right. So that was a scene from The Matrix. Has anybody here seen the movie? All right, we got a few. Highly recommend it. One of my favorite movies of all times. Skip The Matrix 2, skip The Matrix 3, skip The Matrix Rebirth, and go straight to the real sequels, which is the John Wick series. And if you see The Matrix, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But on that note, our two sources of attention were in that one clip. So let's get into it. The first one is stimulus-driven attention. Part of your attention comes, or the source of your attention is the stimulus that is in the environment. So the example of that from the clip was the woman in the red dress. So there was nothing that Morpheus told Neo in terms of a goal that Neo was trying to achieve, in terms of anything that Neo was trying to do on his own. He was just trying to navigate through the busy streets, and all of a sudden this woman in the red dress came, and because of stimulus features, because everybody else was dressed in black, because she was extremely attractive, because she was walking in a seductive way, whatever it was, those stimulus features grabbed Neo's attention, and he turned to watch her as she walked. So that is stimulus-driven attention. That is also known as exogenous control. So that is the fancy term for this particular type of attention. It comes from the Latin exo, which means outside, and then genus, which is generated. So this is literally where attention is generated outside in the environment. So in this case, the stimulus itself grabs your attention, or in other words, attention is driven by the stimulus. So that's stimulus-driven attention. But then in the same clip, we saw an example of the next type of attention, which is goal-directed attention. So after Neo puts his attention back on Morpheus, Morpheus says, were you paying attention, Neo, or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? And Neo starts to, stammer and protest. And then Morpheus says, look again. And that is goal-directed attention. Morpheus gave Neo a goal, look again at the woman in the red dress, and Neo turned his attention, or attempted to return his attention, back to the woman in the red dress. So there was nothing about the stimulus that was present at that time that was grabbing Neo's attention, but there was a goal that was given to him, and this is goal-directed attention. So this is the other source. It's known as endogenous control. So again, from the Latin endo for inside, and genus for generated. So this is inside generated control. And this is when we actually move our attention ourselves. So if anybody ever asks you, oh, hey, you need to pay attention, right? Pay attention to this. What they're saying is exert some endogenous control and focus your attention to where I'm asking you to place your attention. So we can actually move our attention into different areas, to different stimuli. And again, that attention is driven by our goals. So any questions about the distinction between endogenous and exogenous control? All right, so keep that distinction in mind as we turn to our first COGLAB, because it is one of the ways to understand what is going on in COGLAB number 1, which is change detection. All right, so hopefully you've participated in the COGLAB, so this will be mostly review, but just to jog your memory, in the change detection COGLAB, 2 pictures were presented in alteration, and your task was to detect if a change occurs in a picture, and in 50% of the pictures, there was no change, they were identical. And in the other 50%, there was a change, the pictures were different. And there were 2 conditions that you completed this under. One condition was the no flicker condition. And this is where the pictures appeared immediately one after another. So it was picture number one, picture number two, picture number one, picture number two. However, there was another condition known as the flicker condition. And this is where gray lines appeared between the pictures. So you would see picture number one, gray lines, picture number two, gray lines, picture number one, gray lines, picture number two. So we'll take a look at, again, just to refresh your memory, what that might look like. So we have the flicker condition. So you would see a picture like this. Then you would see gray lines. Then the picture came back. And the question is, did anything change or did things not change? So does anybody want to venture a guess whether there's a change or whether there's no change? Mm-hmm.
No change?
This was actually one of the no change ones. So in this one, there's no change. So spoiler alert, this is one in the flicker condition where there is a change. So let's try this. Hands up as soon as you see the change. So in the flicker condition, again, remember you see the picture, gray lines, no picture, gray lines, picture, gray lines, no picture. We had about half of the people. We got the rest of them. What changed? The light. The light disappeared. So that light on that lamppost just disappeared between one and the other. So that was the flicker condition. And then we had the no flicker condition. And in the no flicker condition, we're going to, it would be one picture and then no gray lines. It just went straight into the other picture. So let's see if we can detect a change here. So this is picture number one. Hands up when you see it. Picture number two. Picture number, okay, so immediately everybody noticed that that girl teleported into the phantom zone. And in a case like this, where we have, spoiler alert, no change, we have picture number one, picture number two. Picture number one, picture number two. And you can very easily see that there is nothing changing between these as they go from one to the next. So we're going to take a look at the results first, just to kind of put actual numbers to our understanding of our own kind of experience. So here we have on the x-axis, we have, first off, these are the results of the COGLAB. So the COGLABs actually take your results in the lab, combine them with other results from other students doing the lab in other courses, and then can give you a sort of global, this is what students are doing, this is how they have performed. So on the bottom there, we have the condition, either the flicker condition or the no flicker condition. On the y-axis there, we have the proportion correct. So did you correctly identify that there's no change versus a change? Did you get that detection correct? So in the flicker condition, there's the performance right there. So about 67% correct, it looks like. And one of the things to recall when you're interpreting data like this, you always want to ask yourself, where's chance levels? Where would somebody who's blindfolded perform at this task? And in this case, you only had two choices. Was there a change or was there not a change? So even if you were doing this blindfolded, you would perform at 50%. So we're only at about 67%. 50% is chance levels. That is extremely low in terms of noticing the changes. On the other hand, in the flicker condition, you can see that the performance is way, way higher. You are way more accurate in the no flicker condition. You are way more accurate in the no flicker condition than you were in the flicker condition. Now, you might say to yourself, well, wait a second, that's just proportion correct. Maybe it has something to do with the amount of time that you spent either in the flicker condition or the no flicker condition. Maybe we have what is known as a speed accuracy trade-off. So oftentimes in psychology experiments, you get that idea of or you get that phenomenon of a speed accuracy trade-off. If you give somebody a lot of time to do something, accuracy usually goes up. If you force them to do something fast, accuracy usually goes down. So oftentimes what psychologists will do is they'll measure your accuracy. In this case, we see that the flicker condition has lower accuracy, but then they'll just double check. What about your speed? Is the flicker condition much faster than the no flicker condition? Is that why we see this lower accuracy? So here we have same conditions on the x-axis, flicker versus no flicker. We have the reaction time in milliseconds. So 2000 is 2 seconds. It would take you 2 seconds to detect a change. And in the flicker condition, we see that for the correct, the times where you were correct in noticing the change, it took about 12 seconds. 12 seconds of processing that information before you were able to say, yes, I see a change, or no, I don't see a change. But in the no flicker condition, it was actually only about 7.5 seconds. So there is no speed accuracy trade-off here. You are more accurate in the no flicker condition, and you're faster in the no flicker condition as well. All right, so those were the results of the COGLAB. Does anybody have any questions about the results or what they mean? No? Okay. So what I want to do is we're going to just real soon kind of take this to the real world. And this is one of the things that I always want to make sure that we do as much as we possibly can in a when we take a look at COGLABs, especially, but also when we do any sort of work in cognitive psychology. And this is the reason why. If you take a look at these results, on the face of it, these results are extremely trivial. And you might be surprised for me to say that as a cognitive psychologist, but think about what we just measured. We just measured a very artificial situation done by people sitting in front of their computer screens, where we had photoshopped images change something in the image. So on its own, it's very important to remember this about any psychology experiment. On their own, they're almost always trivial. There is no big decisions or no big implications that are made superficially by knowing that people can detect changes in pictures quicker if there is no gray bars between them versus if there is a gray bar between them. The question, though, is what does this mean? So again, on its own, beyond trivial, but once you start digging into what does it actually mean, then we can get into some really important big time implications. Then you start to see the power of why we do psychology, and that is why I always try to get this back into the real world. So we're going to take a look at a real world example right now of change detection and change blindness in a more naturalistic setting. Okay, so, and we're going to see exactly how far this can get pushed. So what I would invite you to do is pay attention to the kind of how much change is done. Pay attention to who successfully notices the change and who is unsuccessful at noticing the change. And we'll have a discussion about it when the video is completed.
Most of us think we're pretty observant, but with a bit of mind control, I wanted to see if I could make these people take even the most obvious things for granted.
Excuse me. Do you know how to get to Trinity Church from here?
Yeah. You see that church down there?
Yep, straight through there.
And then you keep going down.
Excuse me. Sorry, which way?
You see where that church is down there?
Yeah.
You stay on that, which is, I believe, Broadway. And then you walk down 2 or 3 blocks, and Trinity Church is on the right-hand side. We're walking in that direction.
All right, I just want to make sure everybody noticed the change. Okay, good, because that's part of the requirement. All right.
Excuse me, you don't know where Trinity Church is, do you?
Might be Wall Street and Broadway.
Okay. Well, we're down here somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, you see Trinity Church.
Oops, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah. Inside the Trinity Church. Right there. Yeah. If you keep going that way, you'll hit Broadway, then you go down a couple of blocks.
Okay.
And
Thanks very much.
That seemed almost too easy, so later on I see how far I can take it.
Excuse me, do you know where Trinity Church is?
It's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last time I switched with someone who looked a little bit like me, but where's the fun in that?
Oh, excuse me.
You know who best direct you? The other side. You see where that lady's standing?
Sure.
That's the pool. No, the lady in the gray.
The other side.
Yeah, the other side of
But
the
you
pool.
so you don't know where it is?
Exactly what street? No, but it's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excuse me, do you know where Trinity Church is from here?
Yeah, fine. Come on, I'll take you, or you want to walk now?
I'm gonna catch some other people. But
Sorry, guys. The picture.
So
Okay,
you
listen,
think?
once you go on Broadway,
Yes.
remember the numbers are going... I could have sworn it was another guy. Once you hit the Broadway, you're going down.
Yes.
Walk up straight
that
that
way.
way, and just walk straight down. You're
Brilliant.
going to see it. It's right. It's really brown.
That's brilliant. Thanks for your help.
All right, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Excuse me.
Okay, so we're gonna pause it right there. All right, so thoughts about what is going on, speculations about why was this person almost successful. He came the closest to actually noticing. What might be some of the reasons why that occurred? Yep.
I learned in my last psychology class that we tend to go along with what everyone else thinks. And so if you're looking around and nobody else is like, this is weird, if the guy is like, I'm a different person, you're more likely to brush it off as, oh, I must have misremembered things. I must have been thinking of someone else, seeing someone else, must have, bumped my head today.
Okay, so first possibility is that the whether or not you notice the change is basically dependent upon whether other people notice the change as well, and you will almost kind of second guess yourself. If you notice a change, but nobody else is acting like they notice a change, you will actually second guess yourself and be like, "Well, no, I must have not. I had a bump on the head, or maybe I'm just having an off day." So that's actually a very plausible explanation for this, because if you notice a lot of the ones where they failed, especially I think in the one example previous to this, they were with other people, right? So it was like a group of people, and he isolated one of them and said, "Oh, hey, can you show me the directions to the church?" And then when they changed, nobody freaked out. So that's a really good example. It brings up another thing about how our minds work. So that's part of. Did you learn that when you learned about the bystander effect?
Yeah, other people, if they say something is right and it's wrong, it's wrong. If a bunch of people are saying it, you'll be like,
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we do, and again, this is oftentimes using your environment to gather information and using your environment as your own representation. You will look to other people, especially in confusing situations where you don't know exactly what the right move is, where you think somebody changed, but you're not entirely sure. Why? Because people don't normally do that, right? People don't normally change identities in the real world. So you might have noticed something, but you didn't quite, you're a little bit confused. And one of the things that we do, because we're social and we have social learning, is you start looking at other people and you start to say, well, what are they doing? And I'm just going to do what they do. And that is a great way to do certain tasks, such as running away from danger. So I don't know about anybody else here, but if I was walking down a hallway and I saw 20 panicked people running in the opposite direction, I would probably turn around and start running with them rather than just keep walking down that direction oblivious. So it's great in that situation. However, sometimes it falls apart. So in the very famous Kitty Genovese story, it fell apart where in that real life incident, the details have been kind of mythologized, so I might not get it exactly correct, but a woman was attacked in an alleyway in full auditory and visual view of about 40 other people, and nobody called the police for a long time because everybody was confused and everybody thought, well, what am I supposed to do? Somebody else will call the police. And it can just impact so much of your behavior. I know just recently, I'll give you two examples because I don't want to toot my own horn, but I do want to make sure everybody is aware of the bystander effect and that looking around to see what people are doing correctly. So I'll give you the less important one first. So let's say that you're at a dinner party and it's a fancy dinner party and you sit down to your table setting and you have 4 plates and 3 bowls and 18 knives and forks and 5 different glasses, and they come down and they serve you your first course. They serve you your appetizer, and you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, what fork do I use? What spoon do I use? What am I supposed to do now? What could you do? Mm-hmm.
Wait a little bit and see what other people do.
You can wait a little bit and see what other people do. Now, where that breaks down is what would happen if nobody else knows what to do. Nobody picks up anything forever because everybody's sitting there going, well, I'm going to see what everybody else is doing. Everybody else is waiting. I'm going to wait. Meanwhile, everybody else is looking at you going, I'm going to see what everybody else is doing. Everybody else is waiting, so I'm going to wait. So the next time you're at some sort of function, and you might notice this, when they say, oh, we got food, for everybody at this party, feel free, can up and enjoy yourself. Just take a moment and look around and see how many people are hesitating, thinking, can I go get some? Is that for everybody? Is that, and then see what happens when the first person goes and gets food. Once they do, everybody lines up afterwards. So I'm just kind of staying on this because this is something that our minds naturally do. And I want to make you aware of this so that you are better citizens and better helpers of the world than when you came in here. And one of the big things to know is that in many emergency situations, nobody is going to help because everybody is confused. So as psychology students, one of your challenges is to recognize that situation and take it upon yourself to say, I'm going to take some action. And hopefully, that will lead to other people helping you out. I'll give you a very concrete example. It just happened last week. I was driving home, and it was after one of the big snowstorms. I was driving home, and ahead of me on in a front yard, I saw what I thought was 2 children playing. And I thought to myself, it's way too cold for those kids to be out there. This is kind of ludicrous. They should be inside. And car after car after car just drove by. And as I got closer and closer, I realized they're not children. They were 2 elderly adults. The woman had fallen down. She had limited physical ability, and her husband could not help her out of the snow. So they were stuck there. And I knew because of courses like this that nobody was going to stop. Because everybody that saw that ambiguous situation, I don't know, am I supposed to get involved or not get involved? What did other people do? Well, that car drove on, so I'm going to drive on. Car behind him, same process. That car drove on, so I'm going to drive on. I knew nobody was going to stop. So I stopped. I got out. I helped her up. Didn't take very long. She got to her home. But again, it's that kind of knowledge that you can use from these studies to actually go out and kind of help the world, just be a little bit of a better place. All right, well, that was a long aside. Okay, so we had the one speculation. This guy noticed the change because he was alone. So he didn't check in with anybody else to see, oh, wait a second, is there a change? Not a change. He had to rely on his own cognition. So maybe that's why he noticed a change. Any other speculations?
The position of where they were standing. So most of the people who didn't notice, they were looking away from the person and telling them where to walk. He was looking directly at the person at the reference point, and then he noticed because he was staring right at the person.
Okay, so when the change occurred, this was the person who was actually continuing to look in the direction that the original person was in, so that when the picture was passed by, his attention was right there. That would actually fit with the COGLAB that we just saw. Because if you're staying in contact with somebody, that means that when that door comes in, there's very little break between the original image of Derek Brown, I believe it is, and the change that occurs. That's a lot like the no flicker condition. But if you look at the person, look away, and then look back, that's like inserting those gray bars in between the change, and that's more like the flicker condition. So even though they did have that door go in between them, it was less of a break between the continuous kind of stimulus presentation, which would, again, increase the chances that you would notice that change. Yep.
He was more actively trying to help them find his way. He was even like intent on walking with him, so we could get to know the person, and then suddenly the person changed.
Okay, and how would that help him notice the change?
Because he was more like focused on the person rather than just the instructions.
Okay. So yeah, that's another really possible explanation for this. So he was focused on the person, and focused on the person is just English code for saying he was paying attention to them, right? Attention is focusing your processing power on a stimulus or a location. So he was actually the only one that said, "Oh, I'll take you," right? Like I'll actually go with you. So he was clearly the friendliest. He was clearly the one that was most engaged. And when you said he was the one that was focusing on on Derek Brown, what that literally means is that he was the one that was processing the information for this individual. He was the one that was actually literally paying attention and telling his mind, all right, keep processing this information here. We're going to focus our attention here, so that when it changed, he came very, very close to noticing the change because he had processed so much of that information that he noticed that there was like a mismatch. I think with his reaction, you can tell that some sort of reasoning overrided that initial notice, because he was surprised. He did the double take, but he just couldn't quite bring it to the threshold of saying that, yes, a change occurred. And that is something that you're going to be able to tie into signal detection when we get to that part. Yep. This was in Britain. It was probably London.
I was gonna say places that are like tourist traps and a bunch of places around will have tourist scams.
Mhm.
So they'll come and be like, "Can I get directions?" Or like, "Hey, can I take a picture?" And he's like, $20 now. You owe me. And so maybe he was wary about being pickpocketed while someone distracts him, so he paid more attention.
Oh, okay. So he might have been somebody that was like more aware of the situation, and because of that, he was more vigilant in terms of, okay. So that also would make him process more of the information of the identity. I guess maybe just in case he was pickpocketed, at least he would be able to describe the person to the police. Yeah, that's a possibility. Does anybody want to argue against that one? Because there is a counter argument there in terms of noticing the change in the person. Can anybody speculate what that might be? Yep.
You'd be more focused on his hands rather than his actual facial features.
Your attention would be divided between his actual facial features and the possible pickpocketing. So on the one hand, this is a great example of why we do the experiments. On the one hand, we have a theory that predicts he's going to know the person more because he's worried that they're going to pickpocket him, so he's processing his face more. On the other hand, we have a competing theory that says, well, no, he would actually know the person less because he's probably focused on the hands, where they are, where the map is occluding, the hands in terms of getting pickpocketed, what his own, body feels like at that moment. So that would say that he would pay less attention to the identity. And the way that we would figure that out is we would run the experiment and see which one of those would basically win out. Okay, so yeah, we have a lot of really, really good possibilities. All of those might contribute. So this is another thing to understand. A lot of times in COGLABs and in psychological theories, we isolate things that we isolate causes because that is the best way to test a cause and see its effect. But in the real world, you can have 5, 6, 7 cognitive psychology principles all acting at once and all contributing to the behavior that you're doing. So it's never just one particular explanation. It's usually a multitude of things that mold your behavior. I will give you one last possibility here just to think about because it ties in to our next example. And that is that out of everybody that helped this individual that gave him directions, this man was the only bald one. And you will notice that they're both bald. And it might be that you are more likely to notice people that are like yourself than people that are unlike yourself. So keep that in mind. We are going to take a look at one more thing. And then we're going to have, if we have time, we'll have a discussion where we try to anchor this to the real world. And that little experiment about noticing changes between pictures, this little contrived example where somebody with a door passes between a speaker and a person asking for directions, and the person asking for directions changes, you can actually tie that. And we're going to see if we can get there about how that might affect or cause racism, sexism, fake news, conspiracy theories, etc. We're going to go through one more example, and then we're going to maybe circle back to this. But I do want to show one more of these just to kind of lay the foundation a little bit more. So this is another change detection, change blindness example. And I think this was actually one of the very first that discovered this, this technique. This is what the Derek Brown demonstration was based off of.
The door study. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else. This study was among the first to demonstrate that change blindness can occur outside of the laboratory. This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin and is copyrighted. It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions. Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
All right, so I gave them their chance to plug everything. Okay, so they mentioned that 50% of subjects didn't notice the change. But if you go to the original study, or the original publication of this, and this is always a good reason why you should, for anything that you're interested in, go to the original research. Don't read it in the textbook, or don't stop at it in the textbook. Don't stop at it at Wikipedia. Don't stop at it at a review paper. Whatever you're interested in, pay attention, focus, and go to the original research. For things that you just are trying to accumulate knowledge about, like an overview of cognitive psychology, textbook, completely fine. That is an amazing, resource. However, when you go wholeheartedly into something, or when you want to make something your career, or when it's really important, go to the original research. Because they mentioned that 50% of the subjects in this study did not detect a change. But that hides a very, very important nuance in that data. So what percent of the subjects actually noticed a change? Well, what they did is they had some subjects in a certain age bracket, 20 to 30 years old. And then they had other subjects in another age bracket, 35 to 65 years old. And who do you think did better noticing the change? 20 to 30-year-olds or 35 to 65-year-olds? Yep. Younger people? So you think younger people notice a change better? Does anybody think the older individuals might have noticed a change better? We see a few. Any reasons why they might notice a change? Older individuals?
I think they'll notice and like actually say something. I feel like the younger you don't notice, but
Okay, so you think maybe both groups would have noticed it equally, but the older individuals would be more likely to speak out. Okay, so that would mean that you would actually, in your data, see that older people notice a change more, rather than, and that's an interesting thing, and that's another reason why you should always go to the original data. How you measure things can have a huge impact on whether or on the findings that you have. So this was a verbal measure where they literally went up to the subject afterwards and they said, hey, did you notice the change? And the subjects either said yes or they said no. And it's quite possible that everybody noticed a change equally, but older individuals were more likely to say, yes, I did notice that change. So what you need to do in those cases is you would design another experiment where you somehow used another measure to notice if they, or to detect if they noticed a change or not. So this wouldn't work in a real life setting, but if you had something like galvanic skin response or pupil dilation, something that measured physiological surprise, well, then you wouldn't be able to hide that, right? You wouldn't be able to hide your surprise that somebody changed, even if you're not willing to say that it changed later. Okay, so once again, really cool. We got two competing possibilities, equally noticed or young people noticed more. So the actual numbers, and remember, they said 50%. The actual numbers was that the 20 to 30-year-olds, 100% of them noticed a change in this particular scenario. And for the 35 and 65-year-olds, nobody noticed a change. So this is a startling kind of result. And one of the things that the researchers wondered about was whether or not the change had anything to do with who was actually changing, right? So one of the things that the researchers realized or speculated about was that, well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that the people changing are 20 to 30 years old, right? So 20 to 30-year-olds noticed change when the people changing were 20 to 30-year-olds, or perhaps when the people changing were students. Because if you're doing this experiment on university grounds and you're running into 20 to 30-year-old individuals, chances are that they're students. So was it that there was something about the fact that the experimenters appeared more like students than like 50, 65-year-olds that had something to do with the ability to detect the change? So what they did is they did a follow-up experiment and they said, all right, these two look like students. We were asking students, let's change it up and let's make them look like this. So we're going to dress them up like construction workers and let's see who notices changes now. Well, they didn't run this with 35 to 65-year-olds. This follow-up experiment was only with 20 to 30-year-olds. Originally, that percentage was 100. Spoiler alert, it dropped. Does anybody want to guess how low it went? Yep.
30%.
Okay, we got 30%, 50%. Yep. 60%. All right, so definitely dropped somewhat. We have 30, 50, and 60%. Actual number was 33%. Only 33% of students, sorry, not students, 20 to 30-year-olds noticed the change when it was two construction workers compared to when it was two individuals that looked like, possibly looked like students. So keep that in your mind right now. I want to have a discussion about this, but we don't have the time left in this particular class. So I'm just going to set it up. I'm just going to set this up. So again, I want you to think about how this might affect the development and the maintaining of racism and racist attitudes, sexism, fake news, conspiracy theories. And the hint that I will give you is that it does look like you are more likely to notice changes when they are in-group people that are changing rather than out-group people that are changing. So when you're a student, you're more likely to notice a change in two other students than you are to notice a change in two construction workers. And possibly in the Derek Brown London example, maybe the bald guy noticed a change because the change was to another bald person, an in-group person, rather than all the other previous people when they changed from Derek Brown to the bald guy. They were still both out-group individuals. So toss that in your mind a little bit. Try to figure out where this might lead us in terms of, again, the development and the maintaining of racism, sexism, fake news, and conspiracy theories. But unless there are any final questions or comments, all right, we are done for the day.